Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome back after the week off last week. I ended up this evening coming into the computer and staring at it, trying to work out what I'm supposed to be doing with it. Hi, Canterbury. Hi, Raymond. Hi, Garrett. Hope everybody's doing okay. To had a good week off. I'm looking forward to the next part of the process. Hi, Louise. In the home straight now, folks. Just for reference, there's one thing I want to go through before we get started. Actually, I was looking at the diary, the calendar for the remaining module, and I noticed something that I want to run by people and see what your views are. I'm okay either way, but I just said I'm not making any decision. It's going to be down to you guys to make the decision. You don't have an exam on this module. There is one more assignment which I'll be giving out next week, and you will have plenty of time to get it done. We are now on week 6 officially. The way that the module has been, or all the modules have been set up, and I'm not sure how other lectures are going. I just want to I'm looking at it from my module's perspective. We have classes all through the March process, March week, March month. The first 2 weekends or 2 weeks of April, officially, the college is supposed to be closed. It's closed. That is Holy Week, starting on April 3rd, and the week after Easter, starting on April 10th. And then, according to the schedule, everybody is back for 2 weeks, the week of the 17th and the week of the 24th. For people doing exams, that might be something they want to do because they want to keep the classes going as up to and including as close as they can get to the exams. But as you only have an assignment and a second assignment to do in this module, I'm just wondering, and I'm going to float this with you. Well, that's what I'm kind of half thinking, Raymond. And exactly, Trevor. This is I've had this before, and I've run it this way before, and it's gone down quite well. My suggestion is the college has actually issued a note to lecturers last week that they don't really worry if people we technically had a class on the bank holiday. I ran the pre-recorded session on the bank holiday for February. They're happy enough for that to happen as long as they're informed. So I can get on to during the week and I can inform them if we agree something here. What I'm proposing is we drive on through the remainder of the module. Now that would put the last week of the module on the bank holiday Monday of Easter bank holiday. So what I'm going to suggest is we run live classes up until and including April 3rd. They're online and we get them done. And I'll run a pre-recorded session to be put live on the bank holiday. No problem, Alan. I'll run a pre-recorded session then to be put live on the 10th of April. A final session basically will be pre-recorded because it's a bank holiday Monday. And that finishes the module. There's no coming back then for the 2 weeks of the 17th and the 24th. So technically attending this physical class on a Monday night
Dennis, nobody can hear you if you're speaking. If you can hear me.
He's coming up as having connection problems. He's reconnecting there.
Oh, that's all I need tonight. That is all I need tonight. Okay, it's been working for me all day, no problem all day. All of a sudden, it decides to start packing up on me. Brilliant. So, if we get a kind of a virtual, I suppose, thumbs up in the chat box or something, just to let me know your thoughts. My thoughts would be to run it through. So we have classes. Basically, what's going to happen is, um, ready? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That looks kind of pretty much. I'm not going to comment on that, Mike. Uh, perfect. Okay, we'll do that. So we're going to run the class. So I'll inform the college of the arrangement, just so they're happy with it. That we're going to run. I've been approached by other modules already. One of my other modules. Well, we'll be finished by Christmas, David. That's okay. I've been approached by a student in one of my other classes before the email came up from the college. It may have been the email that triggered the college to send out the email to us all, basically asking if I would, because there's 2 physical classes that I have on a Thursday, if I would do pre-recorded ones or record ones on the week the college is officially closed. So that kind of got me thinking that maybe I'll try and work through and finish classes that week, week of the 10th, get everything finished and done and dusted, and then everyone's done 2 weeks earlier. Yeah, it'll be recording the very last class, Louise. Basically, no, that is replacing two other classes. There'll be just one more class recorded at the very end. So it's more of a wrap-up class than anything else. So it's nothing. It's, as I say, you don't have exams or anything to prep for. So there's kind of nothing different going to come into this. Okay, that's great. I will, Julie. I'm in the college on Thursday afternoon, I think. I won't be doing it tonight because I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning to be in Limerick. So I'll do it Thursday, and when I'm in the college, I'll have a chat with them and just make sure that they're up to speed on it. I have another class that's actually finishing that week as well, and they're not scheduling on beyond Easter because they're they have another module coming in shortly after it. Right, thank you for that. Okay, so before we just get into the stuff material for tonight, I was actually online today and I came across a report in the Irish Times, which I thought was a little bit interesting, to do with health and safety. It was the report from the Rail Accident Investigation Unit, dating back to 2021. Gary, go ahead. Or did you hit the button by mistake? A report came out in the Irish Times today. It just came up online to me. No problem, Gary. No problem. At least now you know the button works. It was to do with an incident in August 2021 with a train going from Limerick Junction to Dublin at around midnight, just after midnight. So it was an empty train. It was a ghost train. That's what they call them. Empty trains are called ghost trains. Clearly, it was a kind of moving of material rather than anything else. The incident was where a train was almost derailed heading to Dublin. At that 7-carriage train heading to Dublin, and it hit repair work. There was a section of the track which had a clamp on it. They were about to repair the track, and the train came on it and hit it and damaged the wheel, a wheel on the train, damaged the clamp, damaged the track, and very nearly, it could very easily have caused a derailment. also caused staff who were on the line to essentially jump for cover. The report is interesting in how, even with all of the hazard analysis and risk managements that companies do, how it can all go spectacularly wrong. That's the one, Damien. That's exactly the one. I have it here on one of my screens here beside me. It is amazing how it can all go so wrong. Irish Rail apparently has procedures for working on a railway line, and they have what's known as a T3 possession. Just reading down through the article, which is what they call it, which is where the possession of the line is handed over to engineers for their repair, which means that the line is then closed. So anything traveling is diverted onto another line. But this T3 handover hadn't been authorized by the time these guys took over the line, took charge of the line. The contract workers had begun working on the line. The supervisor believed the last train was gone through, but wasn't aware of this additional train that will be moving towards Dublin. And basically, there was just a whole it's like a perfect storm, but there seems to be people who just didn't follow procedures. On top of that, the staff who were meant to be working on the line that night weren't qualified to be doing what they were supposed to be doing at that time. And then, just to make things even worse, the driver reported the situation, as is their duty, and the investigation started. The investigation was supposed to be done in 12 months, but it's now 18 months and they're only issuing the report. And they had to apologize for the late issuing of the report, but it was done telling the truth. People trying to belittle the process or trying to say that it wasn't that bad, or you're being over dramatic, saying that it wasn't a clamp that it hit, that the train hit. It was a spike in the rail. It tried to make it a much lesser situation than it actually was. Basically, trying to cover themselves, because what they did was completely wrong. They shortcut the procedure, essentially. Some people were disciplined. Some people were, I think, had a penalty after some of them told untruths. I think they said they lied, basically. There was disciplines and sanctions against 5 of the staff, which is, it's a fairly serious situation. And Irish Rail Iarn Road Éireann brought up 2 safety alerts, reminding staff of the importance of following rules and regulations. We mentioned it back at the start of the module. I mean, anything to do with hazard analysis, risk management. I think some of you are even doing dissertations on this sort of topic. It's the complacency that creeps in. It's after 12 o'clock at night, or it's about 12 o'clock at night. There are no passenger trains running at that hour of the night. We know there's not. There's precious little by way of freight trains running at that hour of the night, because there's, in most cases, where trains pass near built-up areas or domestic areas, then they're not allowed to drive or pass at that hour of the night because of the noise it creates in and around houses. So they're not allowed to run. So it's understandable that maintenance will be done at night, but that doesn't mean they're not going to move the rolling stock. It's a perfect opportunity for relocation, where you can move things. You don't have passengers. You're not stopping at any stations. Interesting point, Jimmy. Yeah, semi-state rules. In other words, we're right looking at this. There's kind of their own rules. I just thought it was interesting, especially I suppose coming to this class this evening, to be able to throw it out there that just because there's all these procedures put in place, people are people. 12 o'clock at night, standing, I believe they were on a section of track around the old Curragh railway station, which doesn't work which isn't used anymore. So between Kildare and Newbridge, or Newbridge and Sallins, whichever one they're between. I think it's Kildare and Newbridge. So it's just an empty piece of track. There's nobody else around. Sure, it's grand. We can get going with it. We're fine. It just seems that I suppose it makes you guys. I mean, you guys are working in risk management, hazard analysis, health and safety. You're working in this arena. It must be very frustrating. And not just in public sector. It must be very frustrating in any company to come along and go to the bother of writing up a procedure, writing up a safety process or something, and then find it's just being ignored. Or as I've known some people are looking at, for example, you require people to have certain qualifications, certain safety pass, certain equipment to work on certain parts of a building site, and they turn up and the harnesses aren't up to spec or whatever. Okay, if anybody in the WhatsApp group admin can see the message that's up there from Donegal. We have a newbie. Thanks, Mike. It's got to be frustrating though. And then it's not so much. There's this protection situation that goes on. Then once something like that happens, then you're going to have the lies. They say the misleading statements and untruths. Basically lied to try and cover the story, cover up what happened. It wasn't the way they say. The driver was going too fast. The driver didn't know what they were doing. There were flags down or lights down the track. The driver, and in case of trains, there was the explosives on the track to warn any driver coming that there was a problem, or that the track was out of operation. Or all the signals have been turned to red, or whatever. Because there was another incident last week where there was almost a crash between two DART trains on the East Coast, where a driver is believed to have gone through two red lights. Again, there are procedures in these situations. There's procedures as to a driver sees a red light, they're supposed to stop. Slow down, and a red light, you stop. And you wait for the light to go at least amber. And if it doesn't go amber, you have a phone in the cab and you ring control and you say, all right, I'm stuck here. And this light is stuck on red. What's going on? That way, then you can announce back to the passengers that there's been an incident in the track ahead and we're not going to be held here for a little while, or we've got to reverse back to another platform, back to another station, or whatever we need to do. But, a driver going through two red lights, one red light, fine, it changed to red just as they were passing the line. But two red lights? I can remember there being panic in Carlow Station here. they upgraded the pedestrian crossing at the St. Joseph's Little Primary School there, and they put in the proper zebra crossing with the amber light and the whole lot, the flashing globe, and it caused an issue.
Dennis, we got as far as issue, and then you went dead on us.
And it's back again. I actually don't know what's wrong with it because, as I say, it's been fine all day, and I have everything. Let me make sure I've got everything turned off. 1 second. I turn everything that doesn't need to be on. It's going to be turned off. Close that. Put that there. Just bear with me 1 second. Close that. Close that and close that. Right, I've everything turned off now except for this screen that's up at the moment. So hopefully that will work. Just double checking everything. Yeah, it's back now. Thanks, Raymond. Yeah, I just don't know why it's bouncing out like that. As I say, it's been working fine all day, and I've had student meetings all this morning, as well as other stuff going on all day, and never a problem. But now all of a sudden it decides to act up. Okay, we'll have everything turned off, bar this screen. So hopefully doesn't look as though the strength isn't improving. Right. So no, just pointing out that it's no matter how good or how bad our hazard analysis is, or our risk assessments are, we're going to run into trouble when people don't bother obeying them, and we're going to find people who will ignore them for whatever reason. Maybe it's lack of experience. That was one of the issues that was raised in the report from the Rail Accident Investigation Unit, that the people working on the line weren't qualified to be there. They weren't suitably trained to be there to do the job. We can argue common sense, but you have a driver heading up a track who doesn't believe there's going to be any problems. It's 12 o'clock at night. They expect to be there. As far as they're concerned, they're driving on an empty track with green lights all the way. You have workers who are working on a track who don't expect any train to come because the last train has gone through, and the next first train's isn't going to be traveling that way again until 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. You might have trains going south, but you won't have the train on the northbound line, so it'll all be good. And you have control who's just basically looking at a big screen that's probably with a skeleton staff, who basically haven't been told that the track has officially been swapped over. It's basically been taken offline. So as far as they're concerned, the track is still live. So you have this comedy of errors in the middle of it, but you also have a lack of focus on the process. But if you put belt and braces into these things, if you start putting a lot more, everything's got to be signed in triplicate type of thing, people will avoid it. They just won't do it. It makes it a challenging situation. Scary situation. But as I say, it's just something I came across today and over the weekend about the two darts that almost had the crash where one almost ran into another, could have run into another, but he didn't. They stopped in time, but essentially he went through 2 red lights to get there. So it was a near miss rather than anything else. We there are times when people just follow the wrong rules. I even saw another document today of in Austria, there was an elderly German driver who was following a sat nav in Austria. I saw a picture of it actually. It was an Alpine sports car, kind of sports car or SUV, and he was following. He followed a sat nav blindly, and I mean blindly. People had tried to stop him as he was driving, and he ended up wedging the car on a hiking path around the side of a mountain in the mountains in Austria. Even though he's warned and told to stop and all that stuff. A bit like you see it every summer in Dunquin in Kerry, where there's a twisty, very narrow pedestrian. It's a walkway, very steep, very twisty, very narrow. Car parks at the top, but people insist on trying to drive down to the water, down to the pier. And it's not feasible. You're not going to get there. You're going to get so far on a very steep slope, and you're going to get yourself stuck between the wall on both sides, possibly on a very sharp bend. And you want to have a very strong clutch and a very strong gear system to be able to reverse back up a hill, up a steep hill. People don't follow rules. Health and safety are seen as rules. You will get the people who will. Some people say they're the Darwin Award contestants, but others are basically. I'm not going to be told what to do. I mean, when someone's telling these people to stop, but they insist that they're going to drive on, that's who's at fault for causing the incident. And then when you have something like the rail situation where everything is just wrong people, wrong place, wrong everything, the whole process was ignored. A structured approach that is there to ensure that you don't have a train almost derailing. That's bad practice across the board. They didn't mention about the speed of the train. So, I mean, was the train because pushing on a little bit, which wouldn't have mattered. You look at these, you see just how many things can go wrong, how easy it is for things to get to go out of shape. And in that situation, it's just a whole series of people just not doing what they're supposed to have done. And the rules are there and they just didn't follow them. Taking the shortcut, get started. Tonight we're going to look into the legislation. We're going to take a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through legislation. The various acts and things that are there for around health and safety, risk assessments, and so on, and risk management. There's a whole range of them. What I find interesting is that so many of them are quite old. Some have been replaced, but many haven't. We have the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005, which replaced a previous act. I think that was backdated to the 80s or the 90s. And there are elements of the 2005 Act which have been updated. I think for the construction industry or the chemical industry or something, there have been slight updates in places. But the overall act itself is still as is, which is what, 18 years ago? 18 years old this year? We have the Chemical Acts of 2008, 2010. We have the Chemical Weapons Act 1997. Organization of Working Time Act 1997. The Offshore Installations Act, the Safety, Health and Welfare for Offshore Installations, 87. They go right back to 1955 from the Factories Act. Some have replaced other previous acts or earlier acts. But like a lot of these legislations that exist, an act is officially supposed, if I remember rightly, an act is supposed to replace a previous act, a previous version. And that's just an automatic replacement. But are people actually, or which one are they looking at? I mean, the very first one there, the Safety, Health and Welfare and Work Act 2005, replaced the Safety, Health and Welfare and Work Act of 1989. Did everyone change their procedures after 2005? Or do people just leave them stand so they're all the same anyway? There's very little change made, so we'll just keep it going as we are. We're grand. It's very, it's not necessarily guaranteed people will update. And if some of these acts are still current, I would argue that as a result of the last couple of years in particular, things are going to have to change. Organization of Working Time Act will have to change, I would imagine, because working time in various industries has now changed dramatically. Across industries and across business sectors and across roles, jobs. Safety, health and welfare of work at offshore for offshore installations, that may need to be looked at now that there's a lot more work going on with offshore work. Chemical weapons, yeah, there's new chemical weapons developed all the time. Are we involved in that? We might be involved in developing some of the components. There is a whole industry in Ireland developing weapons and working in weaponry, or contributing to the weapons industry. Just because we're not making the guns doesn't mean we're not involved in the weapons industry. But as things evolve, sometimes the acts and the legislation has to evolve. And as you can see with some of these, they're quite old. And old, by old, I mean they're going back into the, forget the one from the 50s, but you have them going in from at least the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. As much as I hate to think of it, the early 2000s is 20 years plus ago, 2 decades plus ago. And that's, in business terms, that's old. In operations terms, that's old. In our way we do things, that's old. We do things differently now. Technology has moved us into a more automated situation, which means that the current act that is governing how we do our jobs may not be completely up to date. And what happens if it's not up to date is we'll just ignore what it needs to do. We'll drop it. It doesn't fit, so we won't use it. Which makes it very difficult then to implement. If we take the act by the letter to the letter of the law, so to speak, it can be difficult sometimes to try and interpret it to fit what our current practices are. An interpretation then makes it a very legal situation. What do we do? How do we manage it? How do we deal with the anomalies, the things that we can't make fit, we can't compartmentalize into a section, into a set of recommendations? And if we ignore it completely, we're opening ourselves up for legal challenge in the event of something going wrong. which makes it even more difficult. As health and safety experts, we need to be very much on top of what are the changes and tweaks and whatever that come in, whether they are directives, whether they're statutory instruments, whether they are, whatever from the EU and from the government. We need to be keeping abreast of what needs to be done, and what changes are being made, what tweaks are being made, because it is always evolving and it's not always publicized. Within or as well as the acts, there's also a whole host, and this is not an exhaustive list, by the way, it took off the government site. There are a host of codes of practice in relation to various aspects of business and industry. We start there with chemical agents reaction. There's agriculture. There's risk assessment, just a farm safety. Second one, farm safety. Design installation of anchors. Working in confined spaces. Working on roads. For contractors with 3 or less employees. Code of practice for avoiding danger from underground services. Roof work, biological, and then there's a whole host of other ones. If you clicked on the link, you'd have opened up another tranche of them. So we have the Act governing the main stuff, but we also then have to look at the specifics and see what codes of practice as to how we operate. Clearly, there's nothing that some of these don't get looked at. It's our job to be on top of them and to be able to draw on them as we need to draw on them. That brings back the question that started this evening in terms of using Irish Rail as the example. We can apply the law, the letter of the Act and the letter of the law. We can apply the codes of practice. We can have procedures drawn out. We can have everybody put through a training program on the standard operating procedures, SOPs, and we can get everybody to sign off on them that they have been trained. But on a dark night in August, when this thing in the Irish Rail happened, it takes 1 or 2 people, wrong combination of people, inexperienced people maybe, to get it wrong. We always come back to talking about things like aircraft crashes and things, and very often you find that there was one, actually, there's been a couple, but one I remember from one of the documentaries where the co-pilot, the first officer, kind of brazened it out and tried to let on that they were an expert and they knew everything about the airport, and the pilot was inexperienced. It was his first time as a captain, and it was literally a case of blind leading the blind, and it resulted in them being literally going down a runway the wrong way, going down a one-way road the wrong way. And when they saw what was going on, they tried to pull in. I think it was fog as well, and the runway wasn't marked clearly. There was other circumstances, but the fact is that because they were both inexperienced, and one guy was just full of it, they ignored all the safety and they ignored all the protocols, which is, if you're unsure, stop. No matter how frustrated air traffic control gets, you stop and you ask directions. Because they know where you are. They can see you. They can see you from the tower. They can also see you even in the fog. They can see you on radar. So they know where you are. They can tell you where you are and what you need to do next. There was apparently a situation in New York only a few weeks ago where an aircraft very nearly ran into, it was nearly a major incident because a plane, just as an aircraft was getting ready for takeoff, another plane drove across the runway. Didn't know where they were going. They were lost. apparently, or they were unsure of the instructions they'd been given, and they ended up basically almost stopping in the middle of the road to find out where the heck where they need to go next. As a quick thinking air traffic controller, I think it was a plane coming into land, had basically got the landing plane to abort. Which I've been on a plane where that happened. I've been on a plane going into Brussels, and the plane aborted for, what do they call it? And they call it operational reasons. And I asked a person I know in the aviation industry what that meant, and they said there was a plane on the runway. More than likely, a plane hadn't turned off the runway in time, and they were afraid that if they had landed, they'd have been into the back of it or into the side of it. So there was an obstruction on the runway, so they decided to fly around. The point is, no matter what the laws are, no matter what the regulations, no matter what the codes of practice, stuff can still go wrong. People can still make mistakes. What did somebody say here? One of the earlier classes we had here, no such thing as an accident. It's just a series of unforeseen events. And unforeseen events are 99% of the time caused by human error. Even the technical issues can be caused by human error. Something not replaced properly, something not fixed, something not noticed or spotted, or whatever, or a shortcut. Regulations are great, and they're the things that are going to come out when something goes wrong. The rule book gets taken out, the rule book gets opened up, and people will be nailed to the cross by the rule book. And that's, I won't say it's the fair thing to do because it's the way it is, but there are other things we have to look at as well. The risk is when you put humans into the mix. Legislation doesn't do an awful lot. The short guide here, and you guys, having worked in this process or working in this process every day, probably know this stuff. You probably could recite this stuff in your sleep. So we're going to fly through it fairly quickly. I don't expect it's going to be a late finish this evening. We will fly through this just to kind of, I suppose, refresh memories on a lot of these things. Please feel free to jump in with your experiences and thoughts as you see fit. Probably one of the main acts that govern everything to do in health and safety and welfare work is the 2005 Act. Replaced the 1989 Act, and it sets out the requirements to control safety and health at work, management or the organization and systems of work necessary to achieve the goals, responsibilities and roles of employers, self-employed, employees, and others. And I think that was one of the big changes that brought in it defined the roles of each of the elements, and the enforcement procedures needed to meet the goals or to ensure that the goals are met. Okay, so the first two sections are kind of just setting the parameters of the Act. Section 3 of the Act starts getting into the meat of it. It starts going into the various duties of employers. So this includes self-employed people. And probably one of the biggest ones that they have is that first, all employers are responsible for conducting all the activities of the Act. They are responsible to ensure that it's working and prevent any sort of action that could put employees at risk. Irish Rail did that. They had procedures in place to prevent people getting run over by a train on a track when they're repairing it and avoiding a catastrophe. Very nearly still happened. Luckily, it was an empty train, and that probably had some bearing on the weight distribution will be different. Maybe he was or wasn't traveling as fast as he could have been. If he was an express train, he may have been flying low. He had passed Kildare. That may have been his last stop before Dublin. So coming out of Kildare, he'd have possibly put the boot down. And especially if he was running anywhere late, and would have brought us up to a fairly high speed to get him all the way into Dublin and slowed down from Inchicore on. So he'd have had a good run coming through. I think it's also an area where there's a third track, so he'd have expected there's anything slower on the track, a commuter train or whatever. It would be on a different track to him, so he would possibly be put on the center line. So he can drive away and he misses all the platforms then, and commuter trains can be on the left-hand lane. And they can pull in wherever they need to. They can stop where they need to, and they're not going to hold him up. So it could have been a lot worse. But procedures are there. And still things happen. The employer is supposed to provide maintain a safe place of work, safe access, safe egress, safe use of plant and equipment, and give people plant and equipment that's safe to use. A funny little bit on that one is employers are supposed to give these situations, and when we get to the employee side of responsibility later on, employees are not supposed, they're supposed to refuse to operate faulty equipment or unsafe equipment. And I've asked this question in various sessions or various classes over the years about that very thing, and even things not to do with health and safety, just operational questions. And people will tell me that there is no way they would report a piece of equipment as damaged or can't be used, because they're terrified they would lose their jobs if they did. A forklift driver is supposed to conduct a thorough safety examination of the forklift before they get onto it and drive it. They're supposed to check all the safety features, all the operations, everything, to make sure it all works perfectly. And if there's any of this, if the features not working, they're not to use the forklift. They're to report the forklift as damaged, out of action, or whatever, and they're not to get on and drive it. I know when I started first with a forklift, you couldn't tell the safety features because the whole forklift was literally, and I mean the entire forklift, including the gauges, had all been painted in Hammerite, in red Hammerite. So you could see the circles where the gauges were, but you had no hope of reading them. Don't think they worked anyway. If they were, you could see them. I don't think they worked. And you just got on it and used it. And I've known people who said that if they told a boss that they can't use a piece of equipment, they would be thrown out. Terrified they'd be thrown out. Even though they can't be thrown out, there's just this terror that if they go to a manager and say, this piece of equipment is faulty, I'm not supposed to use this, that they will be yelled at from a height. They will publicly be humiliated. And basically verbally bullied and forced into actually copying themselves on and just get on with the job. I've done it myself over the years. I mean, as I didn't know my rights as an employee, but I didn't know the act. I was never trained in these things at the time. I drove buses, which are completely unsafe to use. And I mean, I drove a bus in Cork, a coach on a scheduled service around Cove, and it would start off with 5 gears. And by the time you've completed the circuit, which took about 40 minutes, you were down to 1 gear. And it would be, you'd go once an hour, and it would take about 40, depending on how many people you picked up or whatever, take about 40 to 45 minutes to get around and come back and stop and then go around and so on, keep going. And I remember coming back, and I actually went to a pound shop to buy a set of spanners. It's the only shop I could find in the center of Cove which actually sold tools. And I used to have to take the cowl off the engine block in the a panel off the floor in the bus to get to the back of the gearbox and reattach the back of the gearbox, the shaft, the drive shaft to the gearbox, because as it was going along, the vibration was loosening the nuts and it was pulling the back off the gearbox. I'm not a mechanic, I just recognized the gap that didn't seem to be right. So I tightened it all up again, I'd start off with 5 gears again. That's unsafe. That's an unsafe process. It's an unsafe bus. It's a bus that shouldn't be on the road. But when you rang it and told the boss, and people in the complained about the quality of some of the vehicles that they were asked to drive, and they never drove for the company again. They were fired. They were never given work again. Good luck, you're out. Bye bye. So there's a fear. I mean, the employer is responsible for creating a safe working environment, making sure that all the equipment is exactly as it should be, and it's safe to use. Removing risks from the use of any article or substance. Any sort of reducing exposure to physical agents, noise, vibration. We even had the situation over the number of years ago where the army had a major issue over a number of years in relation to hearing loss. Something that nobody ever seemed to thought about. You know, we have people out there who are holding portable cannons to their ears called guns and pulling the trigger. It's going bang right beside their ear. And it took decades before somebody decided, that's not right. There's something wrong with that. We need to, I'm sitting there firing off a whopping great, 25 millimeter cannon. And it's right there. The trigger is right there beside me. The gun is right there beside me. Then eventually someone realizes that noise could be causing a hearing problem. We have machines now that come with guards on them, and if you take the guard off, the machine won't work. Or there's infrared beams running along the sides of production lines. If you break the beam, the machine stops, as I found out one day in a Smurfit plant when I caused a bit of consternation. But then the manager was standing beside me and he didn't tell me to move. He didn't realize I was breaking the beam either. Shows what he knew about the production process. So when the operators came down and they sort of copped by the shoulder and moved me sideways. Well, that's a freebie, Jimmy. Or maybe I should shout it. There's a free gift for all members of the military. It's historically it wasn't something. It saves you. See, for the pension, you see, you're at home with the wife, so now you can't hear the wife, so it's great. You can blame the army blame the military for the if you're given out for not hearing any instructions. It's great. I'm sure. I'm sorry for making little of it. I shouldn't. It's a serious situation. Yeah, I'd say that caused a bit of a rattle in your eardrums as well, Mike. It's everywhere. It's possible. A lot of men would be jealous, and a lot of women would be frustrated with the whole process, Margaret. Um, we have the whole process that, yeah, we're supposed to. There's no machinery designed for this. The point I'm getting up to here is we have all these. This act has all these rules of the duties of the employer, and we have machinery lined up now that won't work if you try to do something silly like take the side panel off it, or if you break a beam. We have the military now. You have to wear ear muffs or ear defenders if you're using a weapon. And they're bloody big. The bloody big noise cancelling things that if we're using weapons. Fine if I'm sitting there firing off a whopping great cannon, but if I'm in the middle of charging across a battlefield, and you've got this balance. I've got to have the air defenders on, but also I can't hear what's going on around me. So would I hear an instruction, unless they're all radioed? Will I hear an instruction from a commander to do something, or to change direction, or to do something different? There's for and against. It's the same thing in a factory. Everybody's wearing earplugs. You go down to talk to somebody, and what's the first thing they do? Take the earplug out so they can hear you, which means they're exposing themselves to the noise again. Technically, they're breaching health and safety by removing the earplugs. More importantly, people, if it's inconvenient for them, and that's going to be easier for them to, if I could get at the machine here, not down there where I'm supposed to, they will find a way of bypassing the safety system. They'll find a way of bypassing the system. I remember when I started driving trucks first, way back in the late 80s into the early 90s. One of the mechanics came to me one day. All the trucks were governed, so they weren't able to drive faster than a certain speed. And one day he came into, the mechanic was looking at my van, and they were big. I remember at the time there were Mercedes 608s. They're big box body. I call them a Sherman tank because they were built like one. Big, no power steering, rubbish visibility on the mirrors. Everything was old. And this guy came to me and he said, "You can make that go faster than it's governed at whatever it was at the time. You can make that go faster." And I said, "No, it's governed." And he actually took off the cover off the fuse box, and he said, "See that whatever color fuse it was, yellow or red or blue or whatever." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Take that out." He said, "Take that out. You can drive it as fast as you like. Just keep it handy. If you get stopped anywhere along the way, make sure you put it back. You put the fuse back in there." Find a way of beating the system. It's an employer can put all the preventions in place and they are compliant with the act. Employees, as we'll see later on, are duty bound to obey instructions and to do to use the equipment they're given. But in the event of pressure on the system, pressure to make a deadline, just it's middle of the night, there's nobody around, who the hell is going to know the difference? There's a temptation there to, humans being humans will find the path of least resistance. And if the perception is that the job they're being asked to do is too long or too big or too awkward, then Why do it that way? Do it the other way. Who's going to know the difference? Who's going to know if the temperature is recorded on the report on the temperature logs are actually the temperatures that were taken? As long as they're all in or around the temperatures that the system took once, or that you take once a month, then who's going to know that the temperature being that you're logging is one that actually was logged, or you sat in an office one day and just filled out the sheet? I often wonder, even when I go into a hotel, if you go into the toilet, you see the sign, the inspection sheet on the back of the toilet door, on the back of the door. And I often wonder, does it actually inspect the toilets, or does somebody just walk in? I'm in an awful hurry now today. I don't have really time. I don't have time for this. So yeah, that looks clean. Sign, go. No, I'm not. I'm trying to tell. Just I suppose I'm casting a certain lot of. I'm very cynical at times, Margaret. I can be very cynical about the way rules are applied because I've gone through it too often. I've seen it too often. And that's it. That's it, Raymond. These acts are there to encourage people to do the right thing, to encourage employers to do the right thing. How can an employee reverse the process, Margaret? How can an employee be compliant if to flag an issue will bring out the wrath and the anger and the threats from an employer who's only interested in getting the job done? I don't care how you do it. I talked about the buses. I have to fix the gearbox. I contacted. I had a bus come back from another same company, another bus coming back from a day trip with a group of ICA women. They'd been to Waterford. They were Tramore, Waterford, and they were coming back to the what was it's long since gone, the Hilltop Hotel in Youghal for dinner. And as we came around the roundabout on the Cork side of Dungarvan, it's a big roundabout, the Cork side of Dungarvan. We came around the bypass to Dungarvan, and then as we came around that roundabout, the gear lever on the bus came off the gearbox. So I was in one gear. And anybody who knows that road coming out of Dungarvan heading towards Youghal, it's a place called the Sweep. It's a big winding hill. Beautiful road to drive.
Dennis, come back. Is anybody there?
Yeah, I'm back again. Booted out, booted back. It's going to be frustrating. Okay, I'm back. I can back. The signal is still very low. It says. If I took my foot off the accelerator to slow it down, the bus stalled. If I took my foot off the clutch, the bus was trying to scream up a hill in third gear. And what's worse, come around the other side, come down a long straight in third gear. At that stage, I was freewheeling the bus at 50 miles an hour, 50 plus miles an hour, freewheeling it. My foot clutch jammed to the floor. I had to keep the revs up on the bus because it would have stalled otherwise. And the radiator was behind my back. I could actually feel the heat coming through the seat. Got to the Hilltop in Youghal. They went in for dinner. I rang the boss to say the bus is down to one gear. The gear lever's just flopping around in the hole in the ground. The bus is not suitable for carrying passengers. I need a replacement. His reaction was, "You have one gear, don't you? What do they want? A Rolls Royce?" Absolutely did not want to know about it. And when I demanded that he sends down a bus, because there was no way I was going to face that taking them back in the bus that they were in, they'd refused to get into it. The language wasn't great, and what he came down to me with was almost worse than the one I had. It did have more than one gear though, and he was absolutely livid when he came down, when he came to swap over the bus. Absolutely livid. Which, as I wasn't long with the company, it terrified me. And to be honest with you, you get that, if an employee gets that experience, then back to the point Margaret made, you're almost going to be forced in the future to break the rules because you're not going to want to go through that again. You'll make an excuse somewhere along the way. You're under pressure to get something done and out the door. You're going to take a risk. You're going to take a chance on something because I'm not telling them that that's not going to work. I'm not telling them that the machine's in trouble. I'm not telling them that those parts are faulty. Now, equally, I mean, we prevent things. The whole concept of the act is to stop things like horseplay or messing of any description. And yet, I've seen videos of the Bulmers plant going back a few years, a YouTube video. Talk about being stupid. You record it, then you put it up on YouTube. I mean, wow. Where warehouse staff at night, again, no management, and they were drag racing power pallet trucks across the warehouse floor, and they were doing wheelies and donuts in pallet trucks, riding them like scooters, and they were strapping people to chairs and pushing them across the floor. It's not everything you can think of that you might like to try, but you're not supposed to. A horseplay, basically. Now, I believe management got wind of those videos, and that entire team, that entire night shift, were either suspended or fired for their tactics. I mean, in that case, I think they deserved it because one, they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and two, they then went and publicized it. They stuck it up on flipping black up on YouTube, but TikTok didn't exist at the time, so up on YouTube. So they deserved everything they got there. Well, it's managers a lot of responsibility, or the employer has a lot of responsibility here. Trying to plan, organize, perform, maintain systems that work safely. We can plan and we can organize them, but we now must make sure that the employee actually complies with them and applies them. Maintaining the welfare facilities, so rest areas, toilets, things like that must be provided. Actually, I remember a supplier of ours in Arklow a number of years ago. They were getting a BRC accreditation, British Retail Consortium quality accreditation. It's a bit like an ISO, but it's specific to the British Retail Consortium. And they came to do the inspection, and one of the things that stuck in my mind, they had all the processes were fine. Their production processes and operations were on point. They were all very good. The thing that really, I suppose, caught their attention was employee facilities. This was the British Retail Consortium is like an ISO for products going into the food industry, into the retail sector. And you'd say fair enough. They're looking at how you produce. This company made cardboard boxes, so you can say, okay, well, they're looking at how you produce cardboard boxes. They're looking at how you handle them, how you glue them, how you form them, how you store them, so that they're not getting infested. They're not being attacked by rodents or any of that sort of. They're looking at your pest control and all that sort of stuff, which they did. But the biggest thing that came out of it was they needed more facilities for staff. They actually had to build facilities on site within the confines of their production area, where staff could go for breaks and staff could go and relax and things like that. So it's it's in the extreme of that, you have the likes of Boeing that have Starbucks cafes or coffee docks on the factory floor in Boeing. So somebody can pull up and get a coffee in the middle of the day, just literally step off the line, go into the coffee dock, grab a coffee, have a coffee, go back to work. The whole Starbucks on site, on the factory floor. So providing welfare facilities, and that's becoming more important in terms of people now be more interested and more aware of things like mental health and other potential medical situations, and the whole concept of diversity and inclusion within staffing levels increases the need for welfare for employees within organizations. Information, instruction, training, supervision, constantly looking and monitoring and watching everything. I only found out yesterday. My sister qualified late vocation, I suppose. She only qualified a couple of years ago as a nurse. She works in a hospital in Cork, and a few weeks back, she's just back from holidays, but a few weeks back before she went on holidays, she tripped and fell at work in the hospital. And they thought she dislocated her shoulder, but she hadn't, and they got her x-rayed, and it was pretty much given the all clear. And she was away on holidays, and while she was on holidays, she got a note from her mentor in the hospital, because she's less than 2 years or whatever, a qualified nurse. She got a note from her mentor that they had re-reviewed her x-ray and found that while it wasn't dislocated, they think there may be either a crack or a chip or something. So when she goes back to work this week, I think tomorrow or Wednesday, they're going to x-ray it again to do a double check. First thing I thought when I heard that was, well, why did they miss it the first time? A lot of it is down to just all the stuff that's been going on. They're just terrified now. They're double checking everything. It was an accident, as my wife said. My wife works in a legal. She was saying it was an accident at work. They're petrified. So when they checked it the first time, and it was reported that this was an accident at work, they decided, let's get that out again and take another look at it. Making sure that we have everything absolutely 100% perfect. Providing the training and the supervision to make sure the employees are doing what they're supposed to do. That they're following the processes that are set out for them. Cooperating with other employers in the area. That Irish Rail situation, that was a breakdown of communication in there, as well as everything else. There were assumptions made that the track had been signed off and they could go and work on it. There was a lack of, by the looks of it, there was a lack of experience of the people working on it. The people in charge didn't understand what needs to be done, or didn't understand the process properly. Jumped ahead. Equally, there was no communication to let them know, well, actually, there's another train on that track coming up that line. Hold off for another 20 minutes or half an hour. There was a whole, no matter what doesn't matter what the training is, it doesn't matter what the instruction is, the whole house of cards can still fall down. Provide the appropriate protective equipment. This is one I came across a number of years ago in a nursing home. I was doing some RPL work for a company in a nursing home, bringing a number of care staff up to a qualification on the QQI fan, up to the HIQA approved level situation or qualification, and I was running some training with them, and we went through health and safety, and this is one that caught me. It caught me because it opened up a conversation about employers are supposed to provide suitable protective equipment and clothing to employees at no cost to the employee. And these people working in nursing homes had to buy their uniforms from the company. And none of them had safety shoes or safety boots on them. They were all wearing light, soft moccasin type of shoes. Fair enough, comfortable to be standing in and to be walking around the nursing homes all day dealing with patients or dealing with residents. But the places I ran these programs were country based. So I was over in Cavan, I was in Kerry, I was in Galway, running these programs, very much rural settings where a lot of the residents would have been from farming stock, and they'd have been, farmers, retired farmers, or some of these are big guys, and they're going to be strong because they're used to working the land and dealing with issues on the farm. And just because they're now sitting in a nursing home in old age doesn't mean they haven't still got the strength, or that they're big heavy people. I mean, moving one of these people around the place in a wheelchair, it's very easy if you're standing talking to somebody, they'd come wheeling up on their wheelchair to you and they'd run over your foot. Or lifting them out of a bed, they'll step on your foot, or they'll it's heavy work. Because I was in the Order of Malta for many years, I know what it's like to move patients and the dead weight it can be to move people. To find out that they're working with these conditions and their employers aren't providing any of the equipment, even though the Act says they should. And by the way, the Act dates from 2005. I was in these nursing homes in 2009, 2000. So the Act wasn't brand new at the time. You could say, well, they were in transition. This is 4 to 5 years after the Act came into being. And this is standard practice. Oh, you can get a rebate now, okay. As I said, that's if people know that they can apply for it. I'd say you'll find some nursing homes. I'm asking my brother-in-law actually next time I'm talking to him, because he's into kind of management of nursing homes and things like that. I must ask him actually, do they do that? What they do about it? Do they provide the relevant equipment and clothing and all that stuff, or provide a rebate to staff? Be interesting to hear his take on it. It just struck me as back then they didn't. Back then it was a case, oh no, we have to get our own. So you must apply. So if you don't apply, or you forget to apply, or no one tells you to apply, they're happy. You're paying for it, and they don't have to pay a penny. See, that's against the Act. Then they're supposed to provide it at no cost. Not this thing about not getting the full amount. They're supposed to provide if it's required for your work. They're supposed to provide it. And then if you go back to the welfare facilities, potentially, if they want to protect it, they should do it so that you come in your street clothes, have changing dressing areas or whatever where you can go, and you change into your work clothes, and you use the work clothes in the office around the place, and then you change out of them before you go back out in the street clothes. A lot of people will say that's too much expense into the process. The bottom line here is that an employer is supposed to create a safe place to work. That's the golden rule here. The point I was making earlier on is that you create all this, but you're still relying on people to apply it. Part of the situation is what about, we have to provide the safe workplace. So how do I go about that? There's 5 steps basically in the Act that need to be filled or fulfilled. First one is identify the hazards. It's the same for any risk assessment, and we've covered this already, so I'm just going to fly through these because we have covered these in the past, and you've covered these, I'd say, in other modules as well. Identifying the hazards. And the challenge I give to people when we're looking at hazards is to blue sky it. Look for everything that could potentially go wrong, and use that, and then categorize. And as you'll see, categorize them and eliminate the ones that are unlikely. This will come in handy for the second assignment, because the second assignment is going to be to conduct a risk assessment. So it's important that, I think did we do it last week? Or did I think of it? Or did I just review it? I can't remember. I'm definitely going to see now. No, okay. So it'll be very practical one, dealing with going out and conducting a risk assessment. And you know, so having this idea here, following the five steps from the Act to as part of your process will be useful. Looking at all the potential things that can go wrong. Identify all the hazards within a given arena. Now, you can't have a generalized report here. You can't have a generalized approach. You've got to look at each department, each operation, and from that you identify the hazards associated with that operation or that department. So, and there's a whole, there's 10 listed there. There's actually more, there's 19 listed there. It's non-exhaustive, and it's not ranked in priority. It's just a list of potential things that you could have. You know, like 15 there, entry into confined spaces. That's not going to be something that's there all the time, but in certain areas, you know, especially if you've got things like silos, or just tight working areas, they're places that you can't just go in and forget about. People have been known to die in grain silos, and not because they're smothered by the grain, or because of the gases that build up within the silos. They're completely unhealthy places. They are potentially fatal. Exposure to radiation or hazards with electricity. If there's a power, if the ESB are looking to, or networks are looking to work on the electrical cables in my vicinity here, all power is cut, and that includes the power from my solar panels. The solar panel. Back. They don't want me shoving a load of electricity into the system and electrocuting their engineers. You know, I could be putting 6 kilowatts into the, if all my batteries are charged, I could be putting 6 kilowatts into the system, and boom, cause somebody to get a free perm. Even nowadays, working on things like visual display screens, computers. Companies are supposed to provide procedures and the safe use of computers, how close you're sitting to your computer, the design of your workstation, the design of your seat, your posture at the seat, even having things like wrist supports in front of your keyboard, so that you don't get strain injuries from using your keyboards. A lot of stuff that companies have to look at, and risk assessment is everything. I would like to think that, use the example from earlier on this evening, Irish Rail would have done some sort of an assessment of what happens if there's a train comes through after the track has been closed. By the sounds of things, there was absolutely nothing done to protect the workers. I would have thought, knowing that the railway operates using explosives, that if they were setting up to work on the railway that at night, that they would have gone the safe distance back down the actual track, and they would have put a series of the explosive charges on the tracks, so that anything driving up the track would have got those explosions and would have slowed down. Equally, there's a bar on, I know it's in the cabs if a train breaks down, so I'm assuming that operator, maintenance would have access to one that they can attach to the rail line somewhere, and it can actually turn all signals red. It sends whatever way it reacts with the cabling or the signals. It sends all it sends out a thing to turn all signals red. Got that information talking to a driver one morning on the zombie train, the 6:30 train to Dublin. I knew what the bag was. I knew their explosive bag, the one with all the rivets in it. But there's ways that those engineers could have actually protected themselves in that train, and they could have been working even if the whole system had fallen apart and communication was rubbish and all that stuff. They could still have got messages out, because the drivers know that if they hear the bangs under the train, they feel the vibration under the train as well. That it's a warning about something ahead, so they know to stop. And if all signals have been jammed on red, well, they've got plenty of warning to stop. Clearly, they weren't followed as a basic precaution. Yeah, no problem, Margaret. It's just up to past now. So do people want to take a quick break and be back for maybe 22? Yeah, okay. So back here for 22, and we'll blast through the rest of this. I'll have you out here just after a little after 9 if I can. So back here for 22, and I'll talk to you in 10 minutes. Okay, folks, while the internet's working, we'll get back into it and get through it for you. And just as I said that, the internet decided to drop back a bit. Okay, it's back again. Good. Okay, so we're looking at the first step in this process. As I say, this is a section we'll run through fairly quickly because you do this stuff, probably most of you do this stuff as a matter of course. Identifying all the aspects. The key for me in this is we focus on a specific task, a specific operation, a specific machine, a specific department, something specific, and then we get stuck into it and identify all the potential issues that can be associated with that, all the hazards that can be associated with that task. If we try to cast the net too broad and we try to look at too many things at the same time, we're not going to get the same level of detail that we might require in the process. Once we've identified all the risks, we assess them. And for that, we start to work out what exactly is the significance of them. These are the ones that we look at, and we mentioned these a few weeks ago. We look at whether we can actually fix the risk, take the risk away, whether we can, how do we manage it? What's our decision process around it? We tolerate it, we get rid of it, we transfer it. Whatever action we decide we want to take, depending on the risk, is also depending on the severity of the risk. So we categorize them, any risks we have identified, any hazards we have identified, categorize them first, and then we need to decide what we're going to do about them. So any risk assessment we must address all significant hazards. It must apply to all aspects of the job or any task or work that's going on, and it must cover non-routine as well as routine operations. So even something that's occasional might have a potential risk or will have risks, and we must identify what they are and deal with them as well. Just because it doesn't happen that often doesn't mean that we don't consider it. It's important, and history shows us in industry, in businesses, in a lot of the incidents that have occurred, the issues have been around the fact that certain types of risk or certain potential issues have not been considered, and then that's the thing that goes wrong. That'll never happen, yet it's the one thing that does happen. So it's important that we do it properly, if we're doing it at all. Put in whatever control measures we want to put in. We might decide we want to avoid the risk. Kind of the general risk, the rules that we have here, we want to avoid it. You can't avoid all risks. And sometimes by trying to avoid a risk, we create a risk. So we have to really think about how we're dealing with our risks and what we're going to do. Like the FEMA that we looked at 2 weeks ago, we're looking at the process in dealing with and assessing them and categorizing them and weighting them, scoring them. Unavoidable risks we have to evaluate, the ones that are left. Try and get back to the root cause. Root cause analysis, great tool to use to find out what is the actual root of any potential risk that's there, so that if we can deal with the root of the process of the problem, root of the hazard, we might actually eliminate or reduce the severity or the threat of any sort of hazard identified. The thing about this is this has got to be an ongoing process. This is not something that we can do once and forget about. Risk assessments should be done periodically over a number of over, I'd say, you want to be, depending on what the task is, you could be running this a couple of times a year. I might say that's a bit of overkill, but if anything changes, we've got to redo the risk assessment. Anything in the task changes, even if we have new staff on board, if we bring in new technology, If there's a change, a new product, any change to the process, new materials, we should really look at the whole risk assessment of that process, of that machine operation, to make sure that it's we're not exposing ourselves to some risks that we didn't know about. That might change work practices as well. The last 2 to 3 years have shown us how much work practices have changed. We're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of when COVID kicked off the first lockdown, which was the 12th of March. And in that period, we had changes in work practices, significant changes in work practices. We had remote working. We had risks and hazards associated with access to data outside our organizations, allowing people work from home and access data within the organization. The risk of information getting into the wrong hands, getting out of through the unprotected computer systems in domestic situations was huge. You had the health and safety risks of people working normal office hours in non-office conditions. And very few companies actually conducted risk assessments of the domestic work practices. Even one of the heads of the Health and Safety Authority admitted that if they were conducting an audit of his house, his workstation at home would fail. And this guy's one of the heads of the HSA. He was sitting in a very cramped condition on an inefficient chair. The whole thing was wrong. Lighting was wrong. The ergonomics was wrong. Everything was wrong. My daughter worked from home for 2 years, and she spent most of that time either sitting at our kitchen table or sitting in our sitting room on the floor with a coffee table as her desk. She found that was the most comfortable. She had the opportunity to bring her work on her office chair home, but she said, what was the point? She didn't have a desk. So, absolutely sitting on okay, it was carpet and so on, but sitting on a floor, you having a computer on a coffee table was not the most efficient system. It worked, but so as work practices change, we have to change, which means we have to redo the risk assessments, the hazard assessments. We've got to then re-evaluate everything and work out what's the best way to do it, or best way to deal with these tasks. As employers, that's our duty. As technology improves, more and more technology, more and more artificial intelligence coming in, taking over some tasks and merging humans and machines. As I tell people, when we're dealing with supply chain, one of the most dangerous places in any entire operation is actually not the production line. Because lines, we can build in safety features. We can have the infrared beams to stop people, or that'll stop the line. We can have guards that if you take the guard off the side of the machine, it'll stop the machine. Where there are operators working in close proximity to the line, we can have big red stop buttons in all their locations, so that if any of them get caught up in the machinery, they can instantly hit the stop button and bring the line to an emergency stop. The warehouse is actually one of the more dangerous locations, because in a lot of organizations, not all, some organizations are better than others, as with everything else. In a lot of organizations, you have equipment. It is a minefield, Raymond. Exactly. You have equipment like pallet trucks, forklifts, motorized equipment in the same environment as humans. And not all the humans are on that equipment. There's some people walking around picking product off a shelf or underneath a shelf. You have the risk of head injuries as people, and believe me, I know this one, stepping out from under a rack and you crack your head off the steel rack. That happened. I've had that one, bled for the whole shift. You have people taking shortcuts, climbing up onto the racks. Oh yeah, it's if you don't get a whack on the head from a racking system, you haven't worked in the warehouse. I've known of people who've been killed in warehouses, and they've been killed by forklifts. So at the end of the day, a forklift is a big, heavy weight on wheels. It's a counterbalance, so it's you have a two. If it can lift 2 ton, it's a 2 ton weight in the forklift to balance that lift. And I've seen people get very close to being seriously injured. I've seen people who I've heard of people. I've never witnessed it. I've heard of people who have actually been killed in warehouses because of the close proximity to equipment, to machines. And the crazy thing is, very few of those warehouses actually did any sort of hazard analysis, risk assessment, or any sort of procedures in relation to how people operate. The newer warehouse that I ended up in Shillelagh eventually put in a one-way system or a pathway for pedestrians, but that pathway still had motorized pallet trucks and forklifts on the same aisle as the pedestrians. The only difference was operators knew that they had to be extra careful in that aisle because people could appear around the corner, people would be walking up that aisle, so they generally had to slow down even further. And all it took was one person to come into the warehouse and decide that's not for me. It's a huge job, Ray. It's an absolutely disaster job trying to get people to follow the path. Never necessarily a straight line. The path is normally one that takes you around the wall of the building or something. It doesn't actually take you in the shortest distance. And somebody coming through, in particular management are bad at this. They decide, well, I'm just going up there. And that way is for the workers. It's not for me. I'm the general manager. I don't have to follow those rules. I'll just do what I want to do. And they just barge through. Sure, I'm only going up here for a second. And my time is precious. I can't be taking that long round around the wall of the warehouse. I'll just go where I need to be because I have to be back in my office in 10 minutes, type of thing. You see it even in freight yards. You have these zebra crossings mapped out around the place, and you see people cut corners. It goes along and then it goes 90 degrees, and you'll see somebody going diagonally between the two. But then you see people who allow them to do that. They're allowed to cut corners. Nobody yells at them to get back on the line, on the pathway, the zebra crossing. You see it in Dublin Airport. You're walking out to the aircraft and there is a path to take to the aircraft, which it does not allow you go near the wing of the aircraft. And you'll see people walk under the wing, even though they're supposed to walk around the wing. And they'll sometimes put out cones to try and encourage people to go around them. But, if it's not being policed, you get some idiot will do it. They fly to the Aran Islands every year, and you're dealing with propeller-driven planes. Now, the engines are turned off until everybody is on board and the doors are locked. I'm guessing the engines are turned off and nothing starts until all the passengers are on board and the doors are closed, because they found it hard to control people walking around a small airport, not quite the big stuff, the big airports that where there's a little bit more policing. That people were just inclined to walk anywhere, and they walk right up past the propeller. If the propeller was going, they would be in trouble. So the safety procedure they put in place is that the pilot doesn't actually sit into the aircraft until the passengers are on board, the baggage is on board, and everything is locked down. Once the steps have been taken away, and when I say steps, I mean the metal box that you're standing on to get into the plane. Once that's been taken away, the doors are closed by the ground staff. Then the pilot gets into the aircraft and we'll go through the whole startup and all that sort of stuff, which is quite quick to do. But I'm assuming it's part of that is to one, save fuel. They don't want the plane idling on the taxiway while they're waiting for people to get on board. But two, it makes sure that nobody's going to come in close contact with a propeller that's turned. Just a bit of safety, because you can't mitigate that somebody's going to try and walk over there. Some child is going to ignore what's going on, just run straight into it. You say, well, it's nobody's that stupid. You don't have to be that stupid. Just people not paying attention. People just excited to be traveling and just want to get over to the island, and they just forget what they're doing. There's 2-3 planes on the tarmac at the same time. They're all loading up to go. You get people and they're going to the wrong aircraft and they're being diverted to the other aircraft and they're trying to run across the tarmac and they're not following the pathway on like we have in warehouses. Finding the tasks that we need to do and putting the process in place, analyzing what can go wrong. It's a bit of a doom and gloom scenario, but it is important that we actually spend the time reviewing what happens in our situations. As I said, production lines, by and large, we can put safety features, build them into the production line. It's where we have machines operating with people, and that's increasing. As technology increases, we're going to have more interaction between people and technology. We're going to be on the roads, driving down the road with cars around us that are being robotically, or they're being driven by artificial intelligence. My car can drive. It's not because I can put on cruise control and drive. My car will steer itself if I wanted to. Now it keeps giving out to me for not having my hands on the steering wheel, but I could take my hands off the steering wheel temporarily and it will steer itself. Even when I'm driving, I can feel it pull me on a bend. I can feel the steering wheel moving itself if I don't react fast enough. We're going to find at some stage you're driving on the road and there are cars there that are autonomous as time goes on. So that means we have to reassess the potential hazards. Same in our operations. We can say which are their safety features, and if you step out in front of one of those machines, it'll stop. Yeah, 9% of the time it will. What if the sensor isn't working properly? What if there's a lot of what ifs that we always have to look at. And as technology changes, we have to keep asking what if and adjust our assessments as we go, reconduct the assessments and look at the risks again. We start putting whatever sort of risks into a categorization so we can start to identify what do we need to eliminate, absolutely must get rid of, we cannot tolerate that in our operation at all. What do we leave? Or do we need to put a control measure? And what can we accept or what do we pass on to somebody else? What do we transfer out? Put the responsibility on a supplier to supply product, presented in a different way, packaged in a different way to reduce and remove some of the danger and the risk. What can we substitute? If there's something that's there, for example, when I started working in warehouses first, you'd see people going around and they'd either have some sort of a pocket knife on them, or you'd even see guys with the remember one of the places I worked was a fishing tackle shop, and we'd get delivery. We're wholesale retail, so we'd be constantly making up dispatch boxes and wrapping them and tying them up, or we would be um, opening and unwrapping products that came in to put them into stock. So anything there would at some point go and take one of the fishing knives, and because they were in the shop, they were in stock. So the boss ended up just putting a few of them into the circulation, and we'd take them in their little holsters and we'd have them on our belts. So we're always going around with a knife on our belt. Now when we're leaving the shop, we'd take them off because these things were fairly lethal. But the thing is, it was a full sharp knife, a way of replacing the hazard, because the hazard, many time I would have got a cut from them. Taking out the hazard is to step away from the traditional kind of a dagger type of knife and give people ones that, which the one I actually have it here. I hung on to it when I left the company. It is a spring-loaded, like a spring-loaded Stanley, small. So you got a single blade version. It doesn't extend and retract like a Stanley knife, but it's that type of blade, and it's spring-loaded. So it's like a trigger. You have to hold the trigger. The blade comes out. You use the blade, and as soon as you take your finger off it, the blade retracts back into the device. So it's like a safety knife. But you're not likely to put it in your pocket with the blade exposed. So there's ways of substituting something with a less hazardous situation. In schools they replace scissors with safety scissors. For children they replace their metal scissors with a plastic scissors, so it'll still cut, but it won't do as much damage if it happens to catch a finger. So there's things we can do, but we can only do them, assess it and identify it. And the Act requires employers to step back and look at the operation. Actually, one of the best ways of looking at the operation involves the employee. These assessments should not be conducted in isolation. We should have involvement of all stakeholders. Anybody involved in a task should have an input in a risk assessment. As we found out when we were looking at the FEMA 2 weeks ago. So there's examples there, type of things we can put in place, like using local exhaust ventilation to control exposure and bring it down to an acceptable level. So every single item within an operation has to be looked at. If you have fumes, just even the smell from, you're working in an enclosed situation, using certain chemicals, certain adhesives, then we need to arrange that we have suitable ventilation. My father he's a qualified cabinet maker, and he used to restore antiques. Growing up and my mother used to make fishing tackle. So growing up as a kid, our house constantly had the smell of polyurethane. My mother had polyurethane in the varnish that she was using on her fishing tackle to seal the knots and seal the constructions. And my father used the Evo-Stik, which at one point was a common cheap drug for people. There was glue sniffing used to happen back in the day, and Evo-Stik was generally the glue of choice because of polyurethane. So I mean, grew up in a situation in a house where you had the smell of polyurethane all the time. But they always had a window open. They always had doors open. They continuously had circulation going to dilute it as best to take out the smell as best they could. They used it at specific periods of time, so that we weren't living in it. It was there, and I actually loved the smell of it. It was there, but it wasn't. And while it was a toxic situation, it wasn't toxic enough to cause any lasting impacts on us. they would possibly concentrate on doing it when we were gone, myself and my sister were gone to bed, and when they were going to get ready to go to bed, so they could open during the summer, they could open windows, or they could have doors left open and let the vapors dissipate somewhat. They take steps to do it, to make it a safer environment. But it was that sort of situation we have to watch out for. Everything is a potential hazard, and anything that is a potential hazard needs to be looked at. Unfortunately, even when we do look at hazards, things still go wrong. Look at the number of accidents or incidents that happen, industrial incidents that happen. That's because something wasn't checked, some procedure wasn't followed, someone took a shortcut, someone wasn't paying attention, whatever. Unforeseen events. Once we've gone through and analysed everything, we write the safety statement. And that's the measurements that will be taken in order to avoid the tasks. Who's responsible for maintaining this? Safest way to look at a responsibility is to assign it to a role, not a person. By assigning it to a role, I'm assigning it to a person. But by assigning it to a role, if the person changes, I don't have to go and rewrite the whole thing again. Assigning it to the person, or sorry, assigning it to the role. So assigning it to the safety manager, the production supervisor, the purchasing manager, the warehouse manager, making it the responsibility of a function or of the management role, a supervisory role within the department. It means that if that production manager or that supervisor is promoted to a different department, yeah, I may have to train up the new guy or new girl in the role, but I don't have to change names on the safety statements or anything. It's just the role is responsible. It becomes part of the training process for that role. That's part of their induction. They have to learn this is your responsibility. You're looking after all this. What to do to deal with an emergency? Right, serious or imminent risks. Who do you call? What's the procedure in that situation? What's the checklist? What must happen? Who are the safety representatives or any first aid representatives? Again, who are you going to call in the event of a situation? Who's going to be on standby? We need to review it and amend it as things change. As with everything else, I mean, if we change our practices, change our processes, get a new machine, learn a new way of doing things, all of that requires us to come along and make changes. And that means that we have to be willing to change the statements. Otherwise, what's going to happen is our operation will grow in one direction, but all our risk assessments and our safety protocols will be going in the opposite direction. And when it comes to the changes or it comes to something going wrong, we're actually going to be throwing petrol on the fire because we're looking at two different standards, two different situations. So we have to keep it as part of strategically. Management is responsible to make sure that everything is kept up to date, which is why we need to review the document every so often. And I think that in part this is what happens to companies when we're setting up first, or when we're adopting the act, the conditions of the act, or when we're getting our ISO compliance certification. All great stuff, and we go and we get all that, and it's all hunky dory, and we have to go through hoops to get it, and it is a task. It is a laborious task. We get all that, happy days, life's great, and then we end up with this document or this. That's it. It's done. Put it in a drawer, put it in the filing cabinet, and there we're sorted. We have our health and safety done. We have all our risk assessments done. Great. Thankfully, we don't have to do that again. Well, we do. Some companies do it very well, but I've worked in companies where I came into the company and I ended up conducting the safety assessment because when I asked the CEO, who was extremely pedantic about everything else in business, very much a micromanager on everything else, but when I asked him about health and safety, he said, "Oh, we've never done one of them. What do we want that for? Okay, what happens if there's a fire? What are you going to do? We'll go down the lift. In order of fire, you're not supposed to use the lift, aren't you? Oh, I didn't know that. No. Okay, so if somebody has an accident here, where's they going? Where's the first aid kit? I don't know. Well, for first aid kit. What do you mean? Tesco's downstairs, and Tesco was actually in the basement, on the ground floor. Sorry, Tesco's downstairs. We can go down and grab a packet of band-aids off Tesco. That was his attitude to health and safety. I mean, this is a guy who was extremely micromanage on everything else, but when it came to health and safety, he hadn't a clue. Never done, never worked on that way before. And eventually he said, "Look, you seem to know what you're talking about. You do it." I put my hand up and say I wasn't qualified as a health and safety officer. I certainly wasn't qualified for the role. I had experience from working in organizations and from witnessing how health and safety operated. And I had been involved in first aid, so I had trained people in emergency services and emergency operations. So I kind of had a residual knowledge from that. Still didn't consider myself qualified, but I was a hell of a lot more qualified than he was. I remember when I wrote up the report and gave it to him, he looked at it and he kind of basically said, they're not going to look at half. We're not doing half the stuff. He didn't do half the stuff. It was too much like hard work. That's never going to happen. You're over dramatizing it now. But this has to be done. And then when I told him it has to be rewritten at least once a year, or at least has to be taken out and reviewed, may not be changed if we don't change things, but if there is anything new, more staff, whatever, then we have to be part of it. We'll see how we get on. So look, you have it written now, and we'll see how we get on. It's grand now the way it is. Fortunately, I left a year after that, so I don't know how or what happened after that. So we're looking to develop this document, and it's not just a case of develop it. The next thing is we have to train people, and we have to tell people about it. We have to inform the staff about it. And I must make sure that when we're doing this, that's understood. One of the things that we have to think about here is that now we're a multicultural society. So we have staff of different nationalities working for us. We also, because of improvements in diversity and inclusion, we may have people of different abilities working for us. So we have to make sure that when we are communicating something like a safety statement or policy to staff, that we do so in a language that everybody understands. We can't come along and just start speaking in techno speak, quoting or in legalese, quoting legislation and laws and acts and all that stuff that people don't understand. It is our duty as employers or as managers to make sure that when we are communicating, we do so in a way that everybody understands. And again, something some companies forget. They just take tracts out of legalese documentation that's designed for a different audience, designed for senior management audience maybe, so it's in a different language in terms of people's understanding, and then we go and we put it in front of operators who actually may not quite understand what we're trying to say and what we expect people to do. The language might be too flowery, the language might be too technical, and we may have people. You could actually have a person who's literally just started in the job, so therefore they're not up to speed with the lingo within the company, and they won't get past the first paragraph. It's the employer's job to make sure they do, and the employer's job to ensure that they do understand it. And it's not a case of walk them through a presentation and tell them sign that document to say we've taught you. sign it, but you didn't teach them. And when it comes to, the proverbial hitting the fan, then they're not going to know what to do, because they will say they were never told. You will say, but just you signed the document saying you did tell us. We did tell you. Oh yeah, you sat it down, you walked through a load of legalese jargon that we don't understand. Did you check that we understand it? Well, you said you understood it. Well, you're my boss. I'm hardly going to tell you I don't. I'm terrified of you. I was new. I don't want to be fired because I didn't understand the technical, or didn't understand some health and safety stuff. We've got to second guess these, or not second. We've got to basically preempt everything, or as much as we can. It's in itself, it's a risk assessment. Okay, so we complete our safety statement, and companies, unfortunately, and again, I've bitter witness to this. Companies will then do the Pontius Pilate bit, wash their hands of it. Exactly. It's a good ploy to use the open questions. I'm going to put on my very cynical hat again, Mike, and ask how many people just want to get through the process and how many companies don't go down the test the understanding by asking those questions, and will they just say, like, we've done our bit, we gave you the warning, we've told you about it, just sign that document and you're done. Yeah, unprofessional ones, and there's a lot of those people out there. And we who are the professional ones end up doing business with some of these people, which is why then you end up with unprofessional contractors on your site or in your organization, coming in to do things with different views, different attitudes, and your staff are seeing these guys who don't seem to be marching to the same beat. Your staff see these people who seem to have a different blasé attitude towards a lot of the rules that should be employed, or they're laughing at us for wearing all this gear where they don't. It's even the simple thing of, we have to wear seatbelts in cars and we have to wear helmets on motorbikes, and there's other countries where that's almost discretionary. We can't smoke in public places, yet other parts of the world it is okay to smoke in public places, and they people, when they come here, don't understand that whole process. From a company's perspective, once we finish with the safety statement, as I said a second ago, it's not a case of that's it, now stick it on the shelf and we're done. We've got to go back and review it. We must update it. Any sort of changes, anything that happens, any new risks come in, either because of new technology, new processes, new people, more people, new products. It doesn't matter. I mean, businesses over the last 3 years have, if nothing else, if they've done, forget the homework, the remote working stuff, an awful lot of businesses pivoted from the traditional on-site delivery, business to business, and let those secondary businesses do, like the retailers, deal business to consumer. An awful lot of businesses pivoted and they started dealing business to consumer, B2C. That's a complete change in the operation. That's a change, not just sending out pallets of product to retailers. I'm now sending out one unit to a customer. Complete new operation. And if I'm sending out one unit, I've now got to also add the process for reverse logistics to receive products back. And I've got to be able to take things back and process them when they come back on a one-to-one, one-by-one basis. That's a complete change in process. You might say, but sure, it's not, just sending out smaller quantities. It isn't. It's a different scenario. So we've got to be able to manage that. We've got to change our process. That's just in the last 3 years, and that's affected a lot of businesses. I actually know of businesses that have closed down their high street store. One actually did it in January, latest one I heard is in January, and they've been on the go here in Carlow for long before we came to Carlow, which is nearly 25 years ago. They've been they were operating here on the high street, and end of January I think they closed. And they haven't closed, they've gone online, so they've gone to a warehouse somewhere. The driver was, over COVID, their customers were coming to them online. Nobody was coming into the shops anymore. And when they reopened, people didn't come to the shops, they continued online. And then the council decided to increase rates. So that was the decider for the company. There's no way we're paying these rates. To hell with it. We're done. And they pulled out. So that means that their safety statement has to change, because they're now working in a warehouse. They're not working in a shop anymore. They're working with boxes of products, not plastic bags. It's a different situation. Their processes are going to have to change. So, we can't just write it and forget it. We've got to go back and review it. There's the concept in business, the concept in law of the reasonable person, or it used to be known in pre-PC times. It used to be known as the reasonable man. It's a concept in law that whenever there's a question in it that comes up, it's called, what would the reasonable man think? What would the reasonable man's view or opinion be? And it's the same in health and safety. What's the competent person? Getting people to step up and come in and take a look at the process and look at it objectively. Give informed and appropriate advice. And this is rather than a person who has specialized technical knowledge on matters such as electrical work or lifting operations. Someone who has the training, the knowledge, and the experience, the operational application experience, who can look at it from kind of a slightly bigger picture, the meta view, the holistic view, or the helicopter view. But they're somebody you've got to listen to. They have the range of experience and expertise to do the job. And the competent person is the kind of person who's got the world view of things and can actually make a useful contribution to review your safety, to review the process and say, well, no, this needs to change. We have moved on here. This needs to come up to spec, up to code. The other term in this is what's reasonably practicable. Something that all due care has been exercised. You take all possible steps and all possible measures. Go back to that train situation. The train had not been signed, the repair had not been fully transferred over, which means the track was still live. As a precaution, they could have gone, if they had the equipment, if they'd made sure they had the equipment, or if the Irish Rail made sure that repair engineers carried the equipment, they should have gone out, used the equipment that comes on every train. So they would probably have had it on their own trains, their own equipment themselves. Placed explosive charges on the track to warn any oncoming trains at the suitable distances, and also put the bar on to jam the signals. Jamming the signals would also send a notification back to control, because it would have told them all the signals are gone red. So even if they hadn't formally contacted them to say, if there'd been a breakdown in the communication, or they told somebody who was going off shift who didn't pass Yeah, I just see that. Just signals flash up on my screen here when it goes, so it's a case of stop talking, wait for it to come back, and then start talking again. It's frustrating. So I don't think, for example, in the Rabbit that maybe the procedure's not there to do that. Sounds like it isn't, because there's no mention of that sort of situation, of that sort of option in the newspaper report. But putting that, to me, would have been a reasonably practicable step. Equip the engineering crews with devices to go. If you're going on I'm going on the motorway tomorrow, down the M7 tomorrow, and back the M7. And if there's roadworks, they're going to start before you get to the traffic cones. There's a sign that'll tell you that there's roadworks in a kilometer. Then every 200 meters, there's another sign. The next one will tell you what lane has been closed. The next one will, that at that point you're starting to see the traffic cones. And as you get closer, the traffic cones are getting and we're back again. It's worse than an American television program for advert breaks. I'd make money if I started getting adverts put in there. Yeah, I think it's starting to signal something at me. We'll finish this in a second. I'm not going to get to the end of these. We're nearly there anyway. But I think for the rail situation, they could have possibly, if the procedure was there, which it probably isn't, they could have put out maybe explosives or jammed the signal or something to which would have warned the train that there was an issue. Warned control there was an issue, and even if there was, at least got a conversation going as to what the hell are you doing, guys? There's no handover of track tonight, type of thing. It would have forced all the reports to be updated and whatever, but obviously that didn't happen. Just do one more, and then we'll call it. If this thing will cooperate for another less than 5 minutes for me. I said at the start, I said earlier on, one of the most important people in a risk assessment or hazard analysis should be the employee. You have to consult with employees. They're the people doing the job. They're the people in the warehouse who have to sidestep a forklift because they come around that bend too fast. They're the people who are there and know the dangers. They're the people who are there and say, "Chips, the sleeve of my jacket nearly got caught. Could we get the short sleeve jackets, or can we roll up the jackets, or can we get something? Do we have to wear these damn coats at the production line because they're constantly getting caught in things?" All of these are the people who are. It's not management. And with respect, it's not health and safety people. You guys know the Health and Safety Act backwards. You guys know risk assessment backwards. But with the greatest respect, you're not doing the job. In some cases, you're not physically standing there doing the job. So you need to have that level of person who's willing to stand up and say, "No, we shouldn't do it that way because," or throw out a hazard that you hadn't thought about. We can apply the book and the act and all the other stuff to say what we should and shouldn't be doing. But if you want to find out what the shortcuts are, talk to the people who do the shortcuts, the people who have worked around the situation. Get the ally on the production line who will come along and say, "I'm sure if you put that rule in, they'll just do it this way." Like the person I said a few weeks ago on the emergency services who had an issue with the equipment coming back at a call, issues with the equipment, and when they were with the equipment, they when they got back and found the way the reporting had to be done now through a computer system, they basically stopped reporting it. Let the next crew report it. We're not doing it. We're not going to spending the next half an hour trying to use a computer to put in a report to say a piece of equipment doesn't work. You could say, well, they should be done for that. That's negligence and it's endangerment and all that sort of stuff. We'll prove it. Prove that they're the one that they knew about it and they didn't bother reporting it. Very hard to do. Okay, it's just after 9:30. I'm going to stop it there before the system does my head in. There's another small bit in this, but those of you in health and safety will already know all this stuff, but it's worth reviewing it and keeping it in mind and staying up to date with whatever is there, because it is going to be important in your role, obviously. Next week, I'll be giving you out the final assignment for this module, which we'll have until well beyond the process to get it done. And I will also inform the college of the revised arrangements for the module. Have a great week, and I shall talk to you all next week.